for the purposes of the recording, welcome everybody to the May 5th edition of the Cloud Native New York Meetup. It's been a little while since we've had one, right? I think we had some during the pandemic, Gabri, but it's been maybe a year.
Yes.
Or something like that. Yeah, it's been a while.
I would say at least.
At least a year. Yeah. So we're trying to breathe in new life in this new year. So we appreciate everybody who's shown up today, and we look forward to exploring more topics. And so, yeah, did you want to, Leigh was saying something that was, we wanted to capture on the recording. I don't know.
Yes.
On that train of thought, Leigh.
Yeah, I don't know. I was just, I'm excited. You know, we're doing the workshops at KubeCon. Definitely, if you're going to be there, you want to roll through the booth. Got some laptops for people to go and check out some of our cool software. And within like kind of the open source config management tooling kind of space, I'm really excited about what's happening with Carvel. And so if you go to carvel.dev, you can see that there's a couple of tools that are there, and they all compose nicely together, but you could just use one or two of them if you want. And yeah, it's just exciting. I think that some of the most important problems that operators are having to work with and solve on Kubernetes and in the cloud native space, gluing infrastructure together, whether you are using Terraform or Pulumi, and whether you're using this DNS provider or that remote cache from that cloud provider, it's like we're always just gluing things together. And it's super hard. And we have like all of this YAML everywhere. And yeah, I'm excited about tools that help people not have a sucky time,
Make Kubernetes easier. Yeah, I think this is probably the year that Kubernetes becomes a little bit easier for everybody to use. So hopefully we can get.
Yeah, a lot of smart people and cool companies and projects that are really focusing on the UX to make things easy to adopt.
Yeah, absolutely. So I don't know, Gabby, do you want to get started on? I guess we could reshare. We had just mentioned that KubeCon is coming up in about 10 days, and the registration, the virtual registration, there's a free access to the keynotes and $75 of access if you want full access to all talks. So that's starting in about 10 days. And
it's so this is the registration page, and I guess the home, 16th to the 20th. And then I wanted to share this that I accidentally first I was clicking on, that is actually is not new because it's there, I think, from 2020. But I found this, and because one of my colleagues actually posted in Slack, so it was pretty easy to find at that point. And it's an interesting collection of stories around Kubernetes to explain Kubernetes to kids, and they are really fun to read also for adults. So it's nice. Take a look. It's from the CNCF, from the Cloud Native Computing Foundation, and is FIPI. It's a PHP application that's looking to find a home in a cloud native world. So I thought it was interesting.
Very cute.
And I also have another one, and this is features you, Cora.
Oh.
As I was reading, your Twitter, and in particular, I was looking at this collection of really quick articles about Kubernetes and tools around Kubernetes, helper tips, like 5 minutes probably to read each one, and really handy. So follow Cora on Twitter and look for this interesting contribution that she made. Thank you.
Thank you, Gabby. I appreciate that. This was part of a program, actually. There's a program online called Ship 30 for 30. If you're interested in trying to kind of hone your digital writing skills, it doesn't have to be about anything tech, but it's a really great program. I was not totally successful. There's only 12 articles there, but I will aim to make more. I was supposed to do 30 in 30 days. Which is actually really, it was really time consuming, but it was a lot of fun to do this. But if anybody's interested just in digital writing on anything or just kind of practicing that skill, I would definitely recommend this program, Ship 30 for 30.
Healing or reconciliation. So with GitOps engines such as Argo or most GitOps projects have.
Probably it was not for us.
No. But thank you, Gabby.
And then let's go to the reason why we are here today.
Yeah, we've got Leigh here, who is a developer advocate at VMware. I am very grateful to be able to call him a teammate. Leigh has an incredibly deep background in Kubernetes and related projects. He's also worked at Weaveworks. I think, Leigh, you'll probably do a better job of introducing yourself, but I can just say from working with Leigh that I'm incredibly just like in awe of his depth with things related to Kubernetes. He's a committer on Kubernetes codebase and some other open source projects. And so it's really, I think, you know, for me, it's a privilege always to have the opportunity to hear Leigh kind of delve into different topics and provide his perspective on things. He's very, very thoughtful and explains things very well. So with that, I'll actually let you properly introduce yourself, Leigh, and then take as much time as you want to show us all about securing GitOps debug access.
Yeah. That was a very humbling introduction, Cora. For sure, the pleasure is mine that I'm on the Tanzu team now, getting to hang out with all you cool advocates and working with the product and engineering teams. We got a helicopter going overhead. Hopefully that's not too bad. But yeah, I'm super excited. Thanks. You know, we got a cool group joining here today. Definitely, you know, feel free to pop into the chat or just jump in, you know, if you want to ask a question. And yeah, I'm really excited about some of the cool tools that we get to show you today. And then also, I think I'm good, but I had to spin up some extra infrastructure here. So hopefully this demo, the second half of it goes pretty okay. So I'm gonna try to spin up a local cluster and show you guys how simple it is to integrate auth on multi-cluster environments. So what are we gonna be talking about today? Oh, well, I guess I should introduce myself. I'm Leigh Kapili. And I'm Filipino American. I'm actually dialing in from the Philippines here, visiting my family. Awesome. We're in the cloud native world with high-speed networks, and I get to talk to you in low latency HD video from Pacific Islands. So really excited about that. Drop a note if you've ever visited Southeast Asia in the chat. But I work with the Tanzu team. I used to do a lot of work within the Kubernetes project as well as the Flux project. And so I care a lot about the experience that infrastructure people and developers have when working with their compute. And what I mean by that is that I've been in a lot of environments before. I used to do telco. I used to work at a startup, used to work at a small company. And I've seen a lot of the different kinds of problems that you might have when you're trying to expose platform to the developers and the product teams who are trying to actually solve problems at your company or in your organization. We have all sorts of different infrastructure needs, right? Some people, they need one cluster. They want to deploy their workloads there. They want to solve their problem. They want to spin up their website, run their batch load service so that they can go and make sure that they're adding value to their customers or the people that they serve. And then you have enterprises. Enterprises have security teams, they have architecture teams. We got a QA team that likes to use Jenkins and then Selenium. And then we have the dev team who's like over in Java, and like they just really care about their tools. But then we got the build engineers, and they're trying to talk to each other. But then there was a reorg. Your manager doesn't like that person because they did this. And like enterprises, it's a lot of people trying to solve a lot of different kinds of problems. There's different incentives. People have different skill sets. They're trying to work with each other. And so you end up with totally different compute problems. And you also end up with lots and lots of different Kubernetes clusters with different distributions. And then also that's vSphere and there's AWS. It's just complicated, right? So no matter what though, there's this question of how do you get something done with who you're working with? So let's take it back to this idea of identity. Right? You want to do something with the computer. You go into your backpack, you take out your laptop and you pop it open. And then it's like, hey, are you the person that I think you are? And then you go and you put your fingerprint, or you say hi to your webcam, or you type in your password. And then the computer knows who you are and it logs you into your user, and you have your files and the way that you should see your computer, right? And then if you give that laptop to your sister, right, or you lend it to your friend and they log into a guest account, then the laptop, it knows, oh man, like maybe we shouldn't be like sharing user accounts. You know, your sister has her own login and the guest login has like just its own limited sandbox. Well, then we start looking at managing Linux servers, right? And like say we're in a Linux server environment and we got, you know, the root user, but you have your SRE team, you know, trying to actually maintain and manage your systems, and you have like cool logging mechanisms to make sure you understand who is logging in to these important computers that are running your business, right? We're trying to solve problems in a collaborative way. We're in a multi-user environment. And so we're not just handing out the root credentials to everyone, right? We're not just sharing the root password and giving everybody admin access, right? The developers, when they log in their machine, they got to go update the files for the website, but they don't necessarily need to be able to download a new version of Apache and install it, right? They're not trying to install new kernels. And so we don't give the developers root access all the time. But the SRE team, they need root access. Do we give the SRE team the root password? Sometimes. But we're not gonna have them always logging in with the root password, right? And now everyone's gonna have their own kind of approach to sharing identities, right? And you might need some key servers or whatever infrastructure you're gonna use to help people get the access that they're looking for. But sorry, there's just like a lot of noise. So people need the access they're looking for, and even though an SRE team needs root access, they're just going to use sudo, right? They're going to log in as themselves. We're going to go into the sudoers file and make sure that that person has the ability to break glass when they need the privilege that they're looking for, right? But otherwise, they're just going to be themselves, and the system knows they log in with their own credentials. When that person leaves for the next great opportunity, right, we can revoke their sudo access. We can make sure that their keys no longer into the system. And then when a new team member joins, right, we don't have to give them a central token that we have to like revoke. We just give them their own access, and then they get to go and escalate to the privilege that they need when they need it. And so this idea of identity in multi-user systems, this is a basic construct of working together, right? When we look at how we collaborate with each other, we need to know who we collaborate with and for what reasons, so that we can build our systems in a way that makes sense, you know, and so people don't have too much access to the things that they don't need to help keep themselves safe and keep the business safe, or the whatever sort of mission we're trying to serve with our software. And so now we look, and the problems that are old and that have old solutions are new again, because we're using new compute, we're using new infrastructure. And so we kind of got to look and see, okay, well, we have all of these distributed computers. The problem of identity has not gone away. Just because this is a laptop or this is a Linux server, and now I have a distributed computer in my data center, you still got to log into Kubernetes, right? We shouldn't just be handing out the admin kube config from kubeadm to every single person who needs to go and see what's happening inside the cluster. But Kubernetes doesn't come just out of the box with like a way for you to log into it. It's not like a Windows computer, right? Because this is an open project. We need multiple ways for people to integrate, some standard interfaces for people to log in. And so I want to show you some cool software that we have from the kind of Tanzu world. It's completely free, completely open source. You can look at the backlog, you can contribute to it. It's simple, it's written in Go. You know, all the good stuff about cloud native software in an open source world. It's called Pinniped, and it's going to allow us to solve this identity problem so that we can actually work together. Now, why then are we going to be talking about GitOps? The reason is because Kubernetes does also not have a way for you to collaborate on different versions of the configs that you're trying to operate on, right? And it's not an excellent tool at showing you the differences between configs. And it's not an excellent tool at helping you communicate with your colleagues, because Kubernetes is not a chat platform. It's not a forum. It's a computer, right? It's just a computer that likes to run workloads. And so we need other software, other systems, other habits with our team that let us communicate and collaborate on the way that we use the computer. So maybe now, if you're listening and you're really hearing this point, you might start hearing why this identity problem is actually so important and so intertwined with the way that we work with each other to solve problems on our distributed computers. And so I'm gonna show you one way that you could potentially build some habits and use a little bit of software in your organization so you can work together in an effective manner, right? And that's going to be Pinniped with a GitOps workflow. So let's jump in, and I'm gonna share my screen and just show you where you can find some of this software. All right, we got this. So first page you want to go and look at is going to be pinniped.dev, right? Batteries included, Kubernetes authentication. The cool thing about Pinniped is that it doesn't matter if you're using EKS or GKE or AKS or any other managed Kubernetes service provider. It doesn't matter if you can log in to your API server or not, the machine that's running the controller manager and all of that control plane stuff. If someone else is managing that and you don't have access to change the API server flags, except for maybe in these like weird boxes that Google is showing you in the GKE management settings or in like your Terraform or whatever, even if you don't manage the cluster, you can install Pinniped. Same thing. It's like, because you don't have that requirement, a kind cluster, a CAPI managed cluster that you spun up in vSphere, a Kubernetes cluster that you just built on bare metal, something that you built with your own Terraform or with your own Ansible scripts, kubespray, anything, you can install Pinniped and it just works. And the way that Pinniped works is it can either tie in to the private key infrastructure, the PKI of your cluster, or it can also operate through an impersonation proxy. And again, this is like very securely audited software that we use upstream or downstream, like in our products with Tanzu Kubernetes Grid. You can also install Pinniped easily with Tanzu Community Edition. But again, open software. It has, a team that's very cognizant and authoritative in secure designs. The code is audited. You should take a look. This is a cool component that you can add to your cluster. And yeah. So what I'm going to show you today is using Pinniped, and we're going to tie in. I have an organization here that I built just for myself to do some demos with OAuth and that kind of thing. I have this org, right? So it's a GitHub org that I'm a member of. I think I'm the only person in this org, but I have some identities and a place to put some configuration repos in this stealthy tail org. Now, I want to use Pinniped to authenticate with the identities that are important to me, right? I want Kubernetes to know I want Kubernetes to allow me to log in with my GitHub identity. That's kind of the main problem that I'm trying to solve. So there is a little bit of a problem here because most of the standard interfaces that Pinniped supports, they're very common. It's like OIDC, SAML v2, you got Active Directory, which is like LDAP v3. There's a bunch of different protocols in this whole open identity space that are popular with enterprises and also popular with services like Google and all of the social media providers. OIDC is the kind of standard authentication implementation for the OAuth 2 authorization framework. Well, GitHub exposes OAuth v2 as an authorization framework, but they don't have a standard authentication mechanism. And right now, Pinniped doesn't know how to just talk to GitHub's special things, right? But I'm really I'm at my mid-sized company. We love using GitHub. Every developer, at our company has a GitHub account. This is what we do. So I want to integrate here. It's a very popular solution, right? So I am going to tie together Pinniped with GitHub using an open identity connect provider an OpenID Connect provider that can talk to GitHub. So Dex is another open piece of software that we can install in our cluster. We can configure it to expose an internal OIDC endpoint inside the cluster. And then we can tell Dex how to talk to GitHub using its special GitHub implementation. There's a plugin in here inside of Dex that's installed. And then you can just, by default, and then you can hook it up to GitHub. So we're going to be installing 2 different pieces of software in our management clusters. And we want those things to then be configured properly for our authentication credentials. Now, this is sounding like, okay, well, if you're looking at the Dex documentation, I've got to have some YAML here. I got to put my client ID and secrets. And this is not a Kubernetes object. This is just like YAML. Right? Like this is the fresh hell that is being an infrastructure engineer is you just have to wrangle a bunch of configuration and figure out how to keep track of it all. The good thing is we only need to do this once for all of our multiple clusters. We're just only going to have a single cluster that has Dex and Pinniped supervisor installed in it. And then all of our other clusters are going to have a component called the concierge. That's from Pinniped, and we don't need to give those things any secrets. They just know how to reach to our central cluster. So this will be a hub and spoke model of authentication where we'll have one place that is able to perform the credential authentication, and then the authorization gets securely distributed across multiple clusters. Again, I know that I'm starting to get into some pretty kind of scary sounding terms here, especially if you never really played with a lot of identity ideas, then feel free to drop questions in the chat and that kind of stuff. Just let me know when I need to stop and kind of go more deeply into a particular idea. So we're going to install Pinniped, and we need to configure these things so that it hooks up to Dex so that we can talk to our GitHub org. All right. So the first thing you're going to need to do here is you're going to have to go into your GitHub org settings. You can also do this just on your personal settings. And then you go down. Let's see if I can remember where to do this. Developer settings. Then you need to go to OAuth apps. And then you can see I made here an OAuth app. You click through you click the button to make one of these. You go through the form, and then you generate one of these client secrets. So that's the only thing that you need to do that's like outside of Kubernetes here. You go and you get one of these things, you copy your secret, and then you're going to have to figure out how to store that securely and then get it into your cluster. Let me show you how I did that. So the whole point of this is when you get everything set up, then you're going to be able to basically hook up to your cluster. So you can see here, I have a Tanzu Community Edition AWS cluster. I'm hooked up to that. And then I just do Pinniped, who am I? So you run this binary on your local machine. And then it says, hey, you're hooked up to this cluster and your current user information is Kubernetes admin. Okay, well, that's not desirable, right? That's the root account. I don't want to be root all the time. Since I set up this cluster, I happen to have that kubeconfig, but you don't need to give people this access, right? If I go into the Git repository sorry, one sec. There we go. So if I go into this repo, then you'll notice this is not the right repo. That's my Terraform that I just used for the VM. Let's open this up. So this is my control repo for the cluster. And if I go here, because I'm interested in the cluster's configuration, this is where I collaborate with my teammates. So you got, configurations and all kinds of stuff. If we had multiple clusters, this is where we do it. There is a kubeconfig. I haven't checked it in, but this is something that's totally safe. There's actually 0 secrets in this. And get this out of the way. So you can see this looks like a normal kubeconfig, but then if this was privileged or there was some secret or form of identity here, you would think I would be a little bit careful about sharing this on a screen recording, right? But there's 0 secrets in here. It just is basically executing. So here in the users section of this kubeconfig, it's executing a binary right here. Here you can see I installed Pinniped with brew. It's executing the Pinniped CLI with a bunch of flags. And these flags tell Pinniped where the Pinniped supervisor is, what the CA bundle is. That's totally public PKI data there just to validate the certs that were generated. And this is totally safe. You can check this into a public Git repository on GitHub, no problem. And you can distribute this kubeconfig to people. So if this thing has no secrets in it, of course, then you cannot have any particular identity coming out of this. There's nothing different between the people that you would distribute this kubeconfig to. It's just a single resource that tells you how to talk to the cluster. Well, you give those people instructions or some makefile or something to install the Pinniped CLI on their machine. And let me show you then what happens. So if I set my kubeconfig to that temp kubeconfig YAML here, right? And then I run Pinniped who am I? You'll see it talks to the Kubernetes cluster, and instead it knows exactly who I am, right? And I think, let me just see if I remember how to do this as well. Should be in config Pinniped. Yeah, there's a session in here. So you can see this folder on my machine, the .config Pinniped folder has all of the credentials and the session information now, right? So if I actually were to delete this folder, and then I run Pinniped who am I again, then something's cool is going to happen, right? Because I have no session. So it opened up my browser. It also printed out a link in my terminal. So if you're like, logged into a virtual machine or something, you can just copy and paste that link or click it in your terminal. So I sign into GitHub. It goes through GitHub's OAuth 2 flow. It says login succeeded. I'm back at pinniped.yaml.tv, which is the domain for my management cluster. And then if I go to the terminal and I run Pinniped who am I, it knows who I am. It says, yo, that's your username. Here are all the groups that you're part of inside of GitHub. So Kubernetes now knows who I am. I'm logged in, right? I'm not the administrator. I'm like some random person on the cluster, right? If I say kubectl, auth, can I, something like that. Then I don't have as many permissions as you would think, right? Well, what did I do here? Sorry, I think I have a cluster role binding for this. Oh, that's right. I need to set my kubeconfig. So that was me as admin. But then if I set my kubeconfig, then I should have potentially some different permissions. Yeah. So here you can see that when I am stealthy box, then I can't, I can't like get every single verb in every single resource, right? So I don't have access to even do things like, shouldn't have access to do this. Yeah. Right. So when I'm logged in, I can no longer get pods. Right. And this is the basic unit of now my distributed computer knows who I am, and I can give it access to specific things using the normal Kubernetes RBAC APIs. So hopefully the value add is making sense, right? Let's just recap a little bit on what we did, right? Because this is really important. If we want to work together and solve problems in an organized way that keeps people safe from the things that they don't need access to, but gives them access to everything that they should have access to, right? Like people want access to things. Developers want to be able to see their workloads running. You want to do that for them. You want to build platforms so people can solve the problems with the information that they need. Then we got all these distributed computers, maybe not even just one, right? We got a bunch of Kubernetes clusters all over the place. We need some way for people to log in. We need some way for people to bring their identity. And once those clusters can know who those people are, we can give them specific access by configuring the RBAC APIs. Cool, right? So the next bit is we got our infrastructure repo, right? We have our control repository for our cluster. We're gonna do GitOps so that we can figure out how to wrangle all of the complexity. So I have a control repository that knows where my clusters are, and we're using the pull-based model.
You can see how there are
information
on
in this case, because I'm really good with Flux, I just installed Flux.
The environment.
So Flux looks at this directory,
as we have done,
and it installs all of the software that I need to make the cluster
we have
work.
A supply chain basic.
So
that is the one
if you've done a lot of cluster ops, I'm no longer talking in the abstract.
So this
now
is
we're
the
looking
one
at code, right?
Used.
So you're leaning in.
Now I want to change this.
What does Leigh have
instead
installed
of the basic,
in the management
I
cluster?
want to use,
here.
and I just
so I have the Flux system. That's just normal Flux
I want to
stuff.
use
When you run Flux Bootstrap.
There are more
and
information
then I have
that are contained in other YAML file to define the behavior of this. But we see that now
letting me set up my identities within my AWS environment. So
great. So let's
like
update our installation of
as
SAP
part of my secure infrastructure configuration
apply this new configuration
for the ingress.
The developer
external
right
DNS
now
and
is
Cert
doing
Manager,
all his work,
they need to talk to
and
AWS, so we got to
can
have
add
some ways to do
operator,
that. Also, we have this
step,
package
modifying
repos
the
thing.
pipeline
Right?
without
so
affecting
this is how all of my my cluster is kind of laid out from a high level.
So we are also
view
installing
Flux can
the
see
package
things. You can
that
see
is
that I have like the package install RBAC here.
For this
and
specific
then if you
pipeline,
look
we are
into the
using,
config directory, this
we
is
are
where
going
all
to
of the YAML
run
files
test
are.
using
So we've got Kayam over here.
We're going
this
to
is
run,
actually just a Helm
we are going to
repository
add
using Flux, a declarative way of
set
doing
of
Helm
resources
installs.
and
we have our package repos.
Operator.
So here, if you look at the group, this is packaging Carvel Dev.
What do we have over here?
And
we
the type is package repository. So we're registering
before
a OCI image that is going to contain a bunch of useful configs.
And now,
this is
if
where
we look
packages
at
in the Carvel ecosystem get installed from.
Installed.
So we have a component called Cap Controller
now we see
that's
that
also capable of doing tons of nice packaging and GitOpsy things. Go and check it out. It comes by default installed in Tanzu Community
So now
Edition.
what we are going to
and
do
also you can just
is
install
actually
Cap
to
Controller.
work through this
and then
new,
in
supply
the
chain.
secure ingress infrastructure here, there's 3 packages that are being installed.
The source
so
from
Cert
there,
Manager is getting installed with some options.
Build the image if the step
over here.
If this step
and
is
then
successful.
You can see like we've
Build
got
the
Contour
configuration
for our
and
ingress
everything
controller,
that we did
and we have external DNS. So just normal Kubernetes
and if we look now
kind of
at
setup
this
stuff. If you're trying to build a platform, if you've never done this before, basically
we can see that
the problem
there
that
is
this
another
trio of
step.
packages solves is it allows us to talk to any service inside of our Kubernetes cluster if we choose to expose it using the ingress resource, but with
testing
TLS.
pipeline.
So
there
you
is
get to
another step
access
now
that
that's going to
HTTPS
take
resource.
place, and that is managed.
Cool. So
by
here's our
that.
control
Of
repo.
course, there are,
This is
as
where
we
we
were
set
saying
stuff
before,
up
as we were
as like
looking
our
before,
SRE team,
there
our
are
platform ops
templates
team,
to
whoever's setting up
tell
and managing your
supply
Kubernetes
chain
clusters.
choreographer
Well,
how to
now that our clusters
pass the
know
right information
who people
into a
are because people can
pipeline.
log in, then I can set up RBAC.
So
here,
now,
right? In the
again,
same way
there
that
are
I have a config here
configurable params
for
that
making
we
sure
can
that
provide over
Cap
here, and
controller
these
can
are the ones that
install
are
my secure ingress cert
fast,
manager
usually
deployment
managed by
with
the operator,
this
so
cluster
that these
admin
are
role.
specific by
I can give
environment.
people all sorts
Don't
of
need to be
roles. In
shared
fact, Kubernetes comes out of
further.
the box if you just look at the
Let's
cluster
take a look
roles.
at the pipeline that we define over
I'll
here.
just get this using the
Well,
admin kube config
This
since no one
is
has access
source
yet in the
tool
cluster.
pipeline. Okay,
There's
very
roles
good.
here
Let's
like
go down.
edit,
This is
right?
what
Like you can just give anybody edit
this
in the same
desktop
way that you can give
pipeline,
somebody
it's
cluster
going
admin.
to
Well, edit,
essentially
you can give
run
that across the
NPM
entire
tests
cluster, or you can give it
and
in
run
a
the
particular
tests
namespace.
that
The
are
RBAC API
coming
is very
with the
flexible,
package.
right? You can
with
see,
the
just give people
source,
read-only access. You can give them view in a
formatting.
namespace. They can't view secrets, but they can view all the deployments and stateful sets and all of that stuff, and actually have useful, actionable information. They can see,
the pipeline
their
per
app is
se
using too much
doesn't
CPU, or
the supply chain
their
per
app isn't
se
deploying because their config map name is wrong. Empower people with
reflect
information. There's
on
cluster
our
roles
workload,
in here
because our
for people to
workload,
bind to. So
so
the infrastructure
we need to
team, the platform
recreate
team, they can come into this
our
repository,
workload so
start
that now
committing
we can
RBAC definitions so that people can
benefit
open up access to the
from
cluster.
the new
And that's the
application.
vision,
And
right? Now you have
specifically,
the
what we need
ability
to do is
for
that
the GitOps
we
control
need to
repo to
add
give access to people to actually
another
log into the
annotation
cluster and
that
get
is
the
has
information that they
test
need.
true. So this is the change, and we are using now
So
type
how
web
do
for
we
the
make
pipeline,
this
the new
happen?
one that we just
Well, if you look inside, this repository is public on the interwebs.
Oh, I said no.
Just go here,
I say no.
github.com, stealthy tail, and then TCE Flux Pinniped. That's the repository name. You can go and check it out. So this is running my infrastructure, and we have these clusters, directories. So if you go into config,
now
and then into the management cluster, then we have a build
our workload that is created.
the auth
you can see that
config
now
and
we
the
have
auth
a
infrastructure.
test.
So the auth infrastructure has an install of Dex.
Now let's check again
it has the concierge, right? So if I look into here, right, there's a bunch of custom resource definitions and stuff. And the concierge is the component that allows us to actually log in. It's the thing that goes and handles our credentials. And then we have the supervisor. So this component, again, it's like I didn't write any of this YAML. I just got it from somewhere on the internet, right? Wow, this is a lot of YAML. That seems like a huge problem. It's like if you look at the configuration, it's actually not that much config, right? Here's an encrypted JWT authenticator.
Because now
apparently
the
I need one of those for the concierge.
There was
and then if you look at the supervisor, the actual configuration that I'm concerned about as an infrastructure engineer is creating a federation domain, creating an ingress resource, and setting up this secret for our OIDC client so that we can configure the Fed domain. So there is doesn't seem actually that complicated, but why do we have all this other YAML in our repository, right? I needed a little bit of package management, and I needed to be able to do things. And so we want to install Dex, the concierge, and the supervisor from the Pinniped project. And in order to do that, I decided to pull in the YAML into my repository.
What it was expecting.
So if you look at this Carvel directory, and I have a place in my control repo.
So we are not
where
moving
I can
to the next stage.
Write
this is
a little bit of software
and we need to
using a Pythonic programming language on top of YAML, using a tool called YTT. And then the way that I pull in my dependencies is using a completely different, unrelated Carvel tool called Vendor.
What did we
so
see?
Let's look at the vendor.
We saw that there was
here we have a config for vendor. This looks like a Kubernetes object, and that's just because it's a nice way of versioning. But this does not need to be applied to Kubernetes.
to keep
this is just a
a
local file.
Kubernetes
It's a local config
resources
file
that
that we
describe
use to tell
the Git
vendor where to get
repository
some
up to date.
very valuable
Then we use
configurations.
Tanzu build service
So
to build an image,
here,
and this image is
we're
kept up
setting
to
up a
date
path
by
called
the
upstream
supply chain choreographer. So if
auth
something
infrastructure.
changes in the repository,
And
this
then we
propagates
have
to the build.
Dex as a
Then
subpath of that
same
being
thing
pulled
goes
in
for the
from
configuration
Git. Right,
until
so
we
from the
deploy
master
this and run on our
ref
Kubernetes.
in the Dex IDP Dex
So
repository, we're going to clone
this
that Git
was
repo, and then we're
essentially
only going to
our
include
initial
this file.
workload, our
So
initial
we just need this one file.
supply chain.
Well, if we go looking at upstream,
Very nice. Then we
infrastructure,
decided let's
Dex,
also add test.
now we have
So the moment
that
we
one
add
file,
test,
and then it also
we
pulled in
added
the license for us. So
another
you can see this APL2 code.
a source test,
Right, so
as
I didn't
a
write this
step
config.
that links to a
I just ran
pipeline
vendor sync.
to use
I can show you what that
to
looks like
perform
here.
this test.
Just pop
Now this
in,
means that whatever you
go
want
into
to
Carpal
add
folder,
in, do we want to
just
run
vendor
scanning? Do we
sync.
want to run something else?
So here you see that it's
We
making a
can
temp
plug
directory.
in any
It's doing a
existing
git
pipeline
pull.
that you can have
It's
already in
pulling
place.
that in.
And with this
My internet's
mechanism,
working
you
good.
don't
So
have
that's,
to
it's fetching the tags, make sure to check out the proper
whatever
branch.
It's already
And
built,
then
but
on
you
top of that, it
can
also
avoid
fetched these other
to
things. So if we
have
keep
the
looking at
burden
that vendor
of
config,
maintaining the tools
we can
that we have
see
already in
it
place.
pulls in the
Plus,
Pinniped
right
supervisor
now you're
config just
using
with HTTP,
Knative, so
and
there
the
is no
concierge
support.
config with HTTP.
And
Right,
with this
so now I'm
specific
showing you
tool,
a little bit
one of
of like how do I wrangle the
advantages is
complexity of
also
installing multiple
CNR,
components
that
onto
is
my
our
Kubernetes
curated
cluster
and
making
supported
sure
version
to manage the
of
configs,
Knative.
right? There's no Helm
And of
charts
course,
for these
all
things.
of
They're
the
just a bunch of
tools that
configs.
come with that.
And so like, how do we get that installed?
So as next step,
similarly,
what
like for
do you
Dex,
envision?
you know, it's like, I just
From
want
my
to keep things
perspective,
simple,
I'd
but
like
I
to
want a
propose
way
to build a
to
tap
pull in this and make
environment
sure to version it in my
using one of
repository.
your existing
Vendor's
applications
going to let me do that
and
without having to
integrate this
do
application
to opt
and
for like
existing
Git
pipeline
submodules or Git
in
subtree,
our
you know, some of these other dependency
definition,
management tools that
in
you
our
might reach
tap,
for. So I really
in our
like this
Tanzu
tool.
application service.
It can be
Thank you
used
very
to
much.
version YAML, but it's very generic. It's not just YAML. You can pull in binaries. You can pull in an entire hidden or like private, internal, that's the word, internal like directory of code from a Go module that's not intending to export that code. You can pull in node modules this way. Like there's tons of things that you could do with vendor, and you just write these configs, and then you can manage your project a little more cleanly, right? So now I have that upstream stuff, and then it's like, this is just configurations from the internet that are generic, right? But I have my own problems to solve. This is not just going to work on my infrastructure. And so in the kind of process of being an infrastructure engineer, you constantly are trying to have to fork configurations from examples. And I'm going to show you another tool that I'm really excited about that lets you do this in a clean way. So we have a way for vendor now to kind of pull in our things. It locks our stuff. It tells us what commits things are coming from. If these commits change, then they'll update and these files will change. I don't want to touch those things. I don't want to fork them, but I do want to change the configuration. And the way that we can do that is with patches. So there are a couple of tools that let you do some patching and configuration variation in the Kubernetes space. Popular ones would be Helm and Customize. Helm is the approach that lets you use templating. You have a string that comes from a Go template, then it hopefully compiles into a valid YAML file. And what I really like about Helm's approach is that you get an abstraction that looks a lot like this, right? So you can say, have a values file, and I'll show it from down here. So Helm will give you like this high level values file, right? You can put like a bunch of host names into it. You can, put your secrets and stuff, and like configure different options and enable different Booleans. And that's what Helm does really well, right? You have a single file, a bunch of values that are structured. You can even do type assertions. And then it goes into all of these Go templates that build a bunch of YAML strings, and it kind of abstracts the complexity away from you. I really like that about Helm. And then customize has sort of a completely different approach where it doesn't do any of this sort of indirection, this kind of value configuration file. So in customize, we always think about patches. And what patches might kind of look like is, let's find a patch config. Let's look simpler patch. So in customize, you might, say, hey, I want to find this object in my project. Let's patch the deployment with this name, and then let's set some ports on it. And so this is not a complete Kubernetes deployment, but you can add these things by providing the proper names of things. Well, you'll notice that I'm not using either Helm or Customize for a couple of reasons. And that's because a Carvel tool called YTT can really help you wrangle this complexity with a very nice language that feels YAML native, but easily expressible in like a Python type syntax. Right, so you'll notice here, I'm defining an object, and then I'm matching an overlay. So this is the YTT word for patching, is we're gonna have an overlay. We wanna match by the subset of that object. So we'll find any object that kind of matches these fields, and then we'll do our patch. And then here, in these probes that are being added to this container, we're gonna match the container by its name. So a little bit more work than a customized patch here, because you wouldn't need any of this stuff. Like a customized patch would not have this, and then it would not have this, and it also would not have this. Right, so this is a customized patch. We're adding a little bit more code so that we can use YTT, but the advantage of this is that YTT has no idea about Kubernetes. It is not a Kubernetes tool. It's just a YAML tool. And when you look at this, it's very explicit what's happening, right? So with a customized patch, you need to know about strategic merge patches and the merge fields in order to understand that this matches on the container name. In YTT, that's just explicitly named right here. And same thing in customize, you would need to know that it's going to match this, right? And look for the group version kind name namespace combo in order, and API version. But here you can just do that explicitly. And if you don't care about the API version, you can get rid of that. If you don't care about the namespace, you can get rid of that, and you still have valid patches. You can even just match every single deployment in your project, and that works. And so YTT is a very flexible way to start to patch and do overlays. Now, the cool thing is that you can do way more than just overlays. This is what's exciting. Now, if we say we're to look at this ingress one, you'll see that there's data values being used, right? So there's indirection as well. And I think that lesson learned from Helm is that providing values and abstracting away some things so that you can do the config file approach, so that people don't have to read all of these things in order to learn how to configure a project. This is really awesome. So that's how this config is being wrangled. So why did I go down this diatribe here? We have vendor, we're pulling in our upstreams, which is Dex, the Pinniped concierge, and the Pinniped supervisor. And then we have our patches, right? And now I have that Carvel project with those components. If we look at my make file, we can see for the management cluster, just ignore this bash stuff. This is just so that we can do sensible things in a make file without having to use multiple files. We go into the config management folder. We make sure to remove our old build. We source some encryption primitives. So I'm using age encryption with a tool called SOPs to check in my client secrets so that they're not readable inside of my public repo. And then we just do a YTT build with our data values, right? So this is kind of like a Helm install almost, or a Helm template. YTT build, data values, take our upstream and our patches, put them together and output them to our build. And then here we're finding all of our files and just encrypting them using SOPs. So that's the pipeline. Now we have a way to take all of that complex configuration and we can build it with different values for different clusters or whatever we want. Similarly, we do basically the same thing with our workload cluster, except there are no secrets, so we don't need SOPs. And then we just pass the different data values. Also, we're using this cool feature called file marks to just only include the concierge instead of all of the 3 components, since our workload cluster only needs concierge. So then we go to our management and our workload folders here, right? We just do our builds, run our make, and then that's how we get our different versions of the config from our Carvel project. And if anyone has any questions, for sure, happy to delve into it as well. Just let me know. Yeah. So looking then at our workload cluster, we can do a Flux get customizations. We can see when that comes back that we have all of the pieces of our cluster installed, right? So we have our secure ingress set up. We have our package repos that have things like the cert manager install package that we're using. We have our Helm install of KIAM that's managed by Flux. And then we have our auth config and our auth infra that are actually just coming from the builds inside of our YAML repositories. So just to know here, there is so much going on coming from many different sources here, but we can manage it all, right? This is coming from Helm, but it's managed via Flux. This package repo is exposing Carvel packages to our cluster, but it's managed from our GitOps repo via Flux. These package installs and this configuration, it comes from our GitOps control repo via Flux. And so then I can kind of take at the top level with the GitOps management, I can delegate to other package managers, right? I'm asking Helm to install some things. I'm asking the cap controller from Carvel to install Carvel packages. And then I'm also including things from my YTT and vendor project. I'm building those things into things that are for this cluster, and I'm installing those via Flux, right? So everything is organized. And the cool thing about this is that it's organized in the place where we collaborate with each other, right? So I work with my team in GitHub, basically. I clone my control repo, I'm in my editor, I change the files, I'm looking at diffs and patches, I am reviewing pull requests, and this is where we solve our business problems. And so to set up the infrastructure that we need to do that, we can use GitOps to talk to each other, right? GitHub is a chat platform. Like, it's a place where we can leave comments. It's a place where we can share opinions and document things with READMEs and leave comments in our YAML. Kubernetes is not the place to do that. Kubernetes knows nothing about the comments in your YAML. And in fact, it deletes them, right? It just doesn't care. But GitHub cares, right? And whether or not you're using GitHub or GitLab or Atlassian's Bitbucket or whatever you do to manage your source control, I would encourage you to think about storing the configuration that's necessary to run the infrastructure for your business in a place that's safe and designed for that. Something that is separate and apart from the potentially ephemeral nature of all of your Kubernetes clusters, something that's designed to version the different configurations as your infrastructure changes, and something that's designed for you to know who you're collaborating with and talk about the changes that you're making, right? I get so excited about like working in ways that don't suck, because I've worked in environments that it was very painful to understand the state of infrastructure and how it changes. GitOps and tying in identity into your control plane with your clusters, it really changes that. And I really want to encourage you to check out these projects with Pinniped, with Dex, and with the Carvel tool suite, helping wrangle and make installing packages easier. Also, I'm a huge proponent of using Flux, just a very stable set of tools to do GitOps the proper way in your multi-cluster environment. So I keep talking about multi-cluster, right? We have this whole GitOps setup. It's installed our secure ingress packages. This is where we can install our application workloads. We can set up RBAC so people can have the access that they need. And then we have Pinniped and Dex. so that we can log in to our cluster, right? Right, the cluster still knows who I am, and I can add any sort of RBAC access to expose things in my Kubernetes cluster when someone logs into it. Now, how do we do this with multiple clusters? So this is where my demo, I gotta take a couple extra steps here because I was having some issues with just my local computer earlier with Docker. I was just trying some things and I broke some stuff. So the first thing I need to do here is I have a virtual machine in Azure and it has Docker on it. And then I just want to install, do I have? Yeah, I don't have kind yet, but we can go ahead and get that. So let's go and just install this really quick. This might be a little bit boring to watch, but where's the quick start installation from release binaries on Linux? Did I copy this properly? chmod, cool. So I'm gonna create a cluster. Oh, sorry, cluster create. Let's just go. It is create cluster. There we go. So that's gonna go and pull down a new version of Kubernetes onto this virtual machine and install Kubernetes. Get a very vanilla cluster with no special capabilities or anything. And then the other thing I need is going to be that pinniped binary. So let's go and see if we can get the CLI. Here's the binary. We'll get this one, copy this link, and then can I Control Z this? Oh, I didn't want to stop that. How do I background? Oh, whatever. Just get this binary. Yikes. Sorry, friends. I'm like struggling here. How do I copy this link? Copy link. Okay. There it is. Get EMD64. Move. Let's drop that into, I don't know, user local bin and sudo. Cool. Nice. All right. And then let's go ahead and finish creating that cluster. You'll notice I was using some job management there. If you've never played with Bash's or any of your shells kind of job managing features, then go check it out. There's like background, foreground, Control Z can stop a job. I already forgot the shortcut to just background a job. So might be worth actually looking up what that is. Background shell. Control Z. Didn't I press that? Oh well. Starting the control plane. So we're just waiting for Kubernetes to start up here. And then the other thing is I should probably also get another shell for this. 426. Is there like SSH import IDGH. Does that work? Yes. Cool. Nice. We want to also clone our repository. So remember when I said that this repo is public? If you go to stealthytail tc flux, maybe it's embed flux, I think. Oh wow, it's taking me to the editor. Okay, well, didn't need that. We will clone our repository. Here it is, HTTPS. We don't have the secrets here. How do I do that? We need a build. Sorry, friends, I'm just realizing that I don't have we don't know. No, there's no secrets in this. Never mind. Because we're just, so the goal of what I'm trying to do right now is I want to spin up a Kubernetes cluster elsewhere, right? We're going to have a multi-cluster environment. We have our management cluster, and then we have a workload cluster. We can spin up as many of these workload clusters all over the place if we want. And it doesn't matter if they are managed, if they're kind, if they are spun up with kubeadm inside of vSphere. You can do all sorts of things to get Kubernetes, and I want to show you that we can install Pinniped concierge on that cluster with no secrets, and that we can log in to Kubernetes. All right, so this is the last part of the demo.
And you are going to do this by using the same GitOps repo that we were looking at, I suppose.
Absolutely, yeah, that's totally correct.
So that will give us a really great also speed. Like if we need any way to replicate the environment for any reason, that creates a consistency and a predictability in the way we are doing things.
Yeah, that's correct. Very astute observation. Yep. So
with this mechanism in place, we can achieve actually multiple outcome at the same time. And it looks like having decentralized authentication that right now we are placing in the management cluster, and that is really the only point that we need to, let's say, that needs to be more curated, because it's the one that contains secrets, contains all of like the sensitive information. But when it comes to anything else, we want to give to our developer the possibility to spin up their own environment, still using the same authentication methodology, because they will need to reach out to shared tools in the network. They can do it because we are not sharing with them any sensitive information.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm smiling so much because that's totally the point, right? Is that we are able to, as an infrastructure team, install Pinniped and Dex so that it hooks up with our GitHub secrets in the management cluster. And then if we trust that federation domain, then for any cluster that we want to log in with that system, then those clusters don't need secrets. And the way that Pinniped does this is very smart. Again, the team behind Pinniped knows a lot about security, and each cluster has its own private key infrastructure. and it gets delegated underneath that federation domain. So when you talk to the concierge will kind of pass you off to the supervisor from the management cluster. So it is a requirement that the auth is routable from whatever network you're expecting people to log in to the cluster from. Not necessarily like from the concierge, but from where people are talking to this cluster and then to the management cluster. Yeah, people don't need the secrets. You can use the GitOps control repo to go and spin up any number of clusters. You can distribute the kube configs inside of the repository if you want, which is a great place to do it. So people are like, oh, these are my cluster config. They go have their kube config. They can go and log in, and there's nothing more to it. They have their GitHub accounts. You know, provisioning identity is really good. GitHub already has groups and teams, you know, where people have their functions kind of encoded in the way that we work with each other, and so you can take those teams into your Kubernetes clusters wherever they may be, and not have to worry about crazy installs. So.
And that is great, because I can see how in many of our customers there are those situations where, and mainly with the pandemic, because that has been really a big game changer, where they needed to make remote, like the workstation, exactly, and so
virtual workstations, or remote dev, helping people log in from home and make sure that you know who those folks are without having to rely on the locality of the network. Identity is very important for us to be able to collaborate with each other.
Correct. And this in these ways, they can still have their own local environment that can speed up a lot of things, of course, because it's local, but at the same time can be federated with everything in the organization. That's very nice.
Point out that the way that I did this config, hopefully, you can still see my screen. If you go to the workload cluster, the values here is basically just where is the management cluster's Pinniped supervisor. And then this cluster audience field is supposed to be a unique cluster identifier. And so one good way to do this, actually, if you wanted to just have people not think about generating cluster identifiers, is you can use every Kubernetes cluster has a service. Oops, gotta say STL. Ooh, where's sudo apt-get install y kubectl.
Where are we?
Sudo apt update. Sorry, this is a brand new virtual machine. So
okay.
So I think I can just get this. I need to install the Kubernetes repo. What else can I do to get this? Can I exec into the kind pod? Sorry, 1 second. Let me just go get the docs for this on. I should have clicked that link for Linux. Linux, curl. This is fine. Okay, cool. One good way to get that alias K is every Kubernetes cluster has a Kubernetes service. This is where all of the things inside the cluster talk to Kubernetes, and there is a unique identifier on every single object in the Kubernetes cluster. So this is a good unique identifier for each cluster because it's generated from the API server. This is a UUID format. So you can take this thing, literally just run this command, get that UID, and then pipe it into your YTT values. And then this would basically be, you could, do this with make. Yeah, then you get this build. It has the concierge YAML, and then here's the configuration. Right, so it's just these two fields inside of the JWT authenticator. Great. Well, I cloned my repository, and I have kubectl, kind, and the Pinniped CLI installed on this pretty much brand new virtual machine with Docker. And so we have a Kubernetes cluster here. And let's maybe go inside our control repo. I'm already inside the control repo. Let's go inside the config workload folder. And let's apply, go into the build folder. The auth infrastructure. So this just installs the recognized file extensions. Do I need to say recursive? Cool. Cool. Ensure the CRDs are installed first. What is it complaining about? Namespace. Okay, it's happy now, I think, looks like. Move my Zoom window thing. Yep. And then let's go ahead and install the config. Cool. And then if we get the JWT authenticators, sorry, I don't have a completion authenticator. Cool, so this is saying that we have that issuer there. So then I think, let's see if we can remember how to do this. It is Pinniped. I think you have to get the kube config for this cluster. Yeah, okay. So if we have the Pinniped concierge with the JWT authenticator configured inside of a cluster, then we can get the kube config for that cluster using the command pinniped get kubeconfig. And then this is something that I can just check into my repo if I want, right? So I can say kubeconfig.yaml about. And here it's just telling me that everything is kind of working and this is how it's configured. This is the endpoint that's used to access my kind cluster. Is it giving me any more information here? Sometimes in certain places, Pinniped will also tell you which authorization or which authentication mode it's using, but not in this case. And then hopefully, if I were to just say kubeconfig, and then kubeconfig YAML, and then I say, actually, I won't even say Pinniped, who am I? I'll just say kget pods. Here you can see, yo, you're not logged in, right? You got to visit this link. So let me go and click that. It's gonna open up my browser here. I'm gonna sign in to GitHub. It's redirecting me back to the Pinniped supervisor in the management cluster. Finish this login by pasting this auth code into your session. I go here, paste. It says, yo, you're forbidden. You cannot do that. And so that's a success, right? Believe it or not, right? I say, Pinniped, who am I? It knows exactly who I am, right? And so from here, this is where you can start giving access using the normal RBAC APIs. Of course, if you were making this cluster with Flux, on actual infrastructure, you can hook it up to the control repo. It installs this folder with this very simple configuration, and you're good to go. You're good to get started. So the whole picture here is that we're able to delegate the identity from our Git provider, the place where we collaborate with each other. Right? We get to delegate that identity to Kubernetes so that you can log in to the distributed computer that you actually do your work on, so that you're not just going blind inside of the Git repo saying, oh, I think that these configurations are doing exactly what I want. Now you can actually go into the cluster and you can verify for the things that you should have access to, whether or not the resources are healthy, right? Even if your CI pipeline isn't giving you good feedback as a developer, you are able to go into the infrastructure and say, oh, I have read-only access to this namespace, and I can see that it's supposed to be what it's supposed to be. Or you might even have the ability to delete pods so that you can restart your workload quickly in the same way that an SRE would, right? That's a pretty safe thing to do for a developer lead or somebody who's familiar with some infrastructure things. And so, I really want to encourage you to go and check these things out. There's really a whole bunch of stories that you can start to go down once your clusters know who you are, with debugging, with your team, so that you can get people access to the things that they need, so that they can see what's happening to a workload and make commits based off of the decisions that are made on that information. It's just a good way to do identity and login. Of course, Pinniped as well is an open project. Its contributions are completely welcome. We got the backlog over there. The team is really easy to reach on the Pinniped's Slack channel on the Kubernetes Slack. And then it's not just GitHub. You can hook it up to any OIDC provider. If you want to use LDAP v3 because your organization's using Microsoft Office 365, you can do that. If you want to hook it up to Google's authentication because you're a huge GKE user, you can do that. And so go and check it out. Hit me up on Twitter. CAPILEIGH, and I'm happy to chat. Also super happy to field questions on this. Gabri definitely had definitely summarized some of the really big points about why this is valuable.
There is another thing that I'd like to circle back on, that is on one side, from the operator perspective, there are things to do, but you were also talking going through pretty quickly with some valuable tools that you were using from Carvel.
Mm-hmm.
And on the developer side, can you circle back on what was needed? Like, you installed the cluster using Kind.
The workload cluster was just Kind and kubectl, and then the build was just pre-computed by the Carvel tools.
Perfect. So as a developer, I just need, if I'm using the only thing that I need is the cluster and the way to interact with the cluster.
Mm-hmm.
So you are just giving me a YAML to execute, and that's it.
Yeah, and that YAML was basically configured for the environment by the platform team, right? The environment being the management clusters, supervisor endpoint, and you can, that's really the space where your platform team can be thinking about the developer experience, right? If everyone is using YTT, you don't need to include the builds because they can just do a YTTF on the folder. Or if you want to use customize instead, you can do that. If you're using Carvel packages because you're using Tanzu Community Edition everywhere, including on the unmanaged clusters on your local Docker, then you can use packages, right? You could submit a package to your OCI repository and then install that YAML manifest that way. But because the Pinniped concierge configuration is so simple, it is possible to just use a kubectl apply with it already pre-configured in the repo. And then
exactly.
You need to have the Pinniped CLI on the workstation in order to actually log into anything.
Yes, that I think that was also a pretty interesting outcome from this perspective, because you are not giving any toil, any burden to the developer at this point,
Mm-hmm.
just really facilitating their work.
Yeah, as someone who has been a developer and a platform ops person at enterprise and startup scale, I have a lot of empathy for the person who's just trying to do their job, who's just trying to actually focus on the problems that they want. And I think that thinking about platform development from a developer experience use case, prioritizing that developer flow to really keep things simple, keep the mental model small so that the developer can focus on the problem that they want to solve. But then bolting on the experience so that the dev feels like they have the superpowers that they need. You know, if you can give the dev the superpower, then I think you're doing a great job as a platform person. And that means helping a dev who often is just in their IDE, like see resource usage in the production environment, you know, see like really fast access to logs and metrics information, you know, to help that person spin up a new environment if they need, you know, and like those are the fun things that I really like in that problem solving space.
All right. Thank you. Thank you very much, Leigh. It was really interesting. Is that?
Yeah, I really appreciate all of you. Thanks for coming in and joining in, and definitely feel free to reach out to me too. So,
Are there any comments from someone else? Okay.
But has anybody used some of these tools already, or kind of do you work in the space that this would be sort of directly relevant to your everyday work? No pressure to respond.
Okay, so I think that we are also at time 28. Yes, so pretty good. Thank you again, Leigh. And
really fun.
Yeah, Leigh, thanks for adding so much sort of context, and you know, it's like the relevance and like how exciting it is. It's very evident how you describe these things. So I like how you mix sort of the human side of it to give it an anchor and to sort of emphasize how important it is and how it impacts culture and collaboration. How tools can support culture and collaboration.
Yeah, I guess it's like technical solutions are only valuable to the people that they serve, right? And we build those solutions with the people that we work with. So it's always coming back to the people for sure.
Yeah. It's also very interesting to see, you know, Git, which a few years ago, maybe more than a few years ago, but was really just a sort of a developer code repository. And then suddenly you have taking such a primary role in the operational side of things. And now sort of adding that like integrated authentication layer to it. So really Git taking a bigger role in how we manage things, and as you say, how that impacts collaboration. I mean, it's so true for Git in general, like even for developers, all of that functionality on top of basic Git to like do pull requests or create issues or talk to each other or, you know, approve things, review things. Git is like, it is probably the most powerful collaboration tool.
Absolutely. Yeah, definitely some sharp edges and a little bit of a learning curve. But when you're in there, you know, with your team, the ability to do diffs on structured files, and then the trend that you mentioned, where the tools that people are solving with infrastructure they're becoming more developer oriented tools, right? And so the truth is not that developers are now doing ops, but it's that ops people are becoming developers, right? Or that rather they've always been developers solving information problems with infrastructure, but that we're actually serving those people a good developer experience now. We're giving those people powerful tools to communicate, to collaborate, to version things, and to act on structured APIs. Kubernetes is definitely a huge step in that direction, giving people these structured versioned APIs to perform declarative changes and solve hard infrastructure problems so that people can do cool things in their business. So people are getting good dev tools, right? We're all kind of finding more of this kind of lingua franca of collaboration and development in Git, whether we are solving on the front end or in the number of distributed computers we need to deploy today. So yeah.
Okay.
Well, thank you.
Thanks so much for having me, friends.
Thank you.
Get some sleep, I guess.
We're going to eat breakfast now. So.
A good one.
Thanks for joining us at this hour, Leigh. Really appreciate it.
I did sleep plenty, by the way. So yeah. Yeah.
And before
Go ahead, Joey.
before we leave, I wanted just to share that next we have still talking about GitOps, how to implement application as a code to unlock standard standard definition GitOps, and it's going to be Ravi Lachman. I hope I'm not butchering his name. That is field CTO at Shipa. And I guess that's really it.
Cool. See you May 12th.
Bye, everyone.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Nice meeting you all.